What looks like overkill is sometimes just friction removed. I recently put together what some people would call an overkill studio YouTube rig, built around the Panasonic BGH1, the DZO LingLung 20 to 70mm cinema zoom lens, a Desview T2 teleprompter with an iPad mini, and the DJI Focus Pro. On paper, it sounds like far more than most people would use for a talking head YouTube videos. A simpler mirrorless setup would probably do the job just fine. But for me, this rig is less about showing off gear and more about solving a real problem, which is getting videos made consistently while also making better use of the gear I already own. I wanted a setup that was always ready or close enough to ready that I didn't have to talk myself into using it. That's become more important to me than whether the setup looks excessive from the outside. One thing I noticed over time is that the biggest barrier to making more videos often isn't ideas or even time, but friction. It's the mental weight of knowing that before I can film anything, I need to open cases, get equipment out, build the camera up, sort cables, mount accessories, power everything, check framing, and get comfortable enough with the setup that I feel ready to press record. Most of my equipment is usually packed away safely, and that makes complete sense when it comes to paid work. I want it protected, organized, and ready for the jobs that bring the money in. But the same process can make setting up for YouTube feel like a chore. Even when it only takes a short while, the thought of unpacking everything, putting it together, then packing it away again can be enough to drain the motivation before I even start. The BGH1's a camera that I wanted to get more use out of. It's easy for certain cameras to end up sitting in the background, even when they're perfectly capable, simply because your day-to-day workflow moves elsewhere. But the BGH1 still has strengths, especially in a studio context. Its box form factor makes sense once you stop treating it like a traditional hybrid camera and instead lean into what it's good at. It feels more at home in a fixed setup. Paired with the DZO LingLung 20 to 70mm, it becomes something that feels surprisingly purposeful. The cinema zoom gives the rig a solidity and a seriousness that suits the BGH1 well. It doesn't feel like a random lens stuck on a small body, it feels like a system. A big part of this is also about getting real use from my gear without tying up any of the other mirrorless cameras. That matters more than people sometimes realize. If one camera is permanently tied to a studio setup, that can limit everything else. It means one less body available for other jobs, other lenses tied up, and more compromises across the rest of the kit. I wanted this rig to stand on its own so that it could always be ready to shoot without affecting the flexibility of the rest of my cameras. That's where the DZO makes a lot of sense for me. In the past, I might have used something like the Leica 25 to 50 in this role, but that would have meant borrowing from another part of the kit and tying up a lens I may want free for something else. Now that I've got the DZO sitting there permanently as part of a dedicated setup, that changes the psychology of it. I'm no longer building a studio rig out of parts borrowed from elsewhere. I've got a proper rig that can stay assembled and stay useful. The teleprompter is another important part of that. The Desview T2 with the iPad mini isn't there because I want to look more high-end for the sake of it. It's there because it helps remove another layer of resistance. If I'm trying to be clear, stay on point, and get through ideas efficiently, a teleprompter helps. Not every video needs to be read word for word, but even having bullet points or a loose script in front of me makes the whole process smoother. It makes me focus on delivery instead of consistently reaching for the right phrase. For the kind of videos I want to make more of, that matters. The same goes for the DJI Focus Pro. Again, some people might see it as unnecessary in a studio YouTube setup, but I see it as part of making the rig feel complete and easier to work with. I like the control it gives me, especially when using a lens like the LingLung. It turns the rig into something more intentional. It also helps bridge the gap between studio convenience and cinema style usability. It also means that I'm getting more from the DJI Focus Pro itself. Because if I'm totally honest, if you really want autofocus convenience, 9 times out of 10 you're going to reach for an autofocus lens. So part of the value here is building a setup where manual focus tools are already in place and make practical sense, rather than sitting in a case waiting for the rare moment they get used. What also makes this approach work is that the setup isn't locked to one camera forever. Even though I'm using the BGH1 now, the GH6 could easily take its place, and that's probably the next camera I'll use with this setup. In some ways, the GH6 would need a lot less to get up and running. It's a more conventional starting point, and there's something to be said for that when the goal is simplicity. I'm also curious to see how it feels in this role because of its renowned color science, which still stands out as one of the things people value most about that camera. So even though the BGH1 is the current center of this rig, the bigger idea isn't really tied to one body. It's about creating a permanent video station that can make better use of whichever camera it fits best. That's really the heart of it. The setup's about readiness. I tend to pack most of my equipment away in a safe, and that's part of working professionally. Paid work demands that my gear is protected and kept in good order. But for YouTube, the same habit can create too much distance between the idea and the action. The more steps there are between wanting to make a video and actually recording one, the easier it is to pull off. This rig is my way of reducing that distance. I wanted a setup that could stay together, stay purposeful, and stay close enough to ready that filming becomes an obvious next step rather than another task on the list. A big practical advantage is that the batteries are easy to remove from the rig. That may sound like a small point, but it actually makes a big difference. It means I can leave the core setup in place without feeling like everything is locked into one awkward state. I can power it down, remove what I need to change, and come back to something that still feels assembled and waiting for me. That reduces hassle, it reduces reset time. More importantly, it reduces excuses. I think that matters more than chasing some ideal of minimalism. There's a lot of pressure in online creator spaces to make everything look simple, compact, and efficient, as though the best setup is always the smallest one possible. But in practice, the best setup is the one that gets used. If a larger, more involved rig actually removes barriers and makes regular production easier, then it isn't overkill at all. It's appropriate for the way I work. More than that, it's fun, and that matters too. Because a rig that's ready to go, enjoyable to use, and built in a way that makes me want to sit down and create is always going to be a simpler setup that I keep putting off using. This was a challenge because I had to be honest about what was really stopping me from making more videos. It would have been easier to tell myself I just needed more discipline or better planning or a lighter setup. But the truth is that I needed less friction between intention and action. And I needed something that felt inviting to use, something that stayed built, something that made the BGH1 worth reaching for again, while leaving my other cameras free for everything else. Something that turned the idea of filming from effort into momentum. So yes, for some people, a BGH1 with a cinema zoom lens, teleprompter, iPad mini, DJI Focus Pro might look like a lot for a studio YouTube rig, but for me it makes sense. More than that, it makes the process enjoyable. It isn't really about excess, it's about creating a permanent setup that removes just enough hassle to make consistency more likely, while also making sure more of my gear is actually being used rather than sitting packed away. One thing I've learned is that the gear that gets used is the gear that fits your actual habits, not your idealized ones. This setup fits mine better, and whether the BGH1 stays in that role or the GH6 ends up taking its place, the bigger win is the same. The rig is there, it's ready, and it gives me one less reason to not make the videos I've been meaning to make. Thanks for watching.